Hello and welcome. My name's Emma Wainer. I am the founder and the principal coach of Speaking at Work, and we're here to help you raise your visibility and your credibility at work. Today, we're going to talk about how to write to speak. This week, I have made 3 clients cry in a good way, I promise. One of the women in particular really stands out. She realized that after 50 years, she'd had a massive breakthrough. As a CEO, one of her jobs the entire time is to deliver speeches. She's also the chair of a huge global network, so she has to deliver speeches. And she's always found the process frustrating. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about why she found the process frustrating, but I know that you will resonate with some of the things that she found really, really difficult. The main one being she would have brilliant ideas, they would get stuck in her head, and then she'd find them hard to translate to paper. So I thought we would talk about the process of her having a breakthrough and some of the things we've realized really help her get her ideas out of her head and onto paper and subsequently into really impactful speeches. So why is this important? Well, let's look at the way we write and the way we speak, first of all. When we write, if you work in a corporate environment or if you've been through any kind of higher education, we learn to write academically, we learn to write formally for business. It's just what's done. Now, when we speak, even in those super formal situations, we tend to speak in a much more relaxed, much more dynamic way than the way that we write. So if we sit down to write, the tendency that we have is that we write in a formal fashion, which is great for the eye, not so good for the ear. Now, when you're listening to a speech, you're listening with your ears, not your eyes. So there's something that gets lost in translation, and that loss of that thing is our humanity. You know, we're humans talking to human beings, but if we write to read, we lose our humanity, and that means we lose our impact. And leadership, after all, is all about language. It's about how we communicate our ideas to our audience in the right kinds of language that we use in order to create that rapport. And that's becoming even more important as AI and tech becomes more a part of our lives. It's those adaptive skills, those human skills that can deal with the messiness of humans that is really, really important. So things like empathy and inspiration. Now, we speak empathy and inspiration in a very different way than we would write it. So it's really important that we try to find that humanness in our speeches. Also, the other thing that happens is when we sit down to write, we tend to start at the beginning because we need an introduction, we tend to write the middle, and then we tend to write our ending. And unfortunately, when that happens, more ideas come in and the thing just grows and grows and grows and grows. And suddenly you've got an absolute beast on your hands that needs radical editing to get back to your main idea or to fit the time frame that you actually need and have to speak. Now, there's one thing that I know for absolutely certain, that you have brilliant ideas. Even in the small selection of women that I've met from the globe, they all have a brilliant idea. They all have something significant to say. So there you have these ideas. It's just that we need to find a way to help you get them out of here onto a page in a way that you can then deliver a really, really impactful speech. And believe me, there are many, many ways that we can do that. And I'm going to talk about some of those things today. Listen, I know that writing takes a huge amount of time and energy, right? You're faced with this idea, you've got this wonderful idea in your head, you're faced with this idea of having to sit down and translate it and get it onto paper. I know the thought of sitting there and looking at that blank piece of paper with a pen in your hand and loads of ideas kind of swirling around in your head, and you're not really quite sure where to start. What do I begin with? How do I get this idea across? What's the best way of introducing this idea to other people? And it can feel really draining of energy. It can feel really time consuming. And one of the things that I often hear women say is that we then start to procrastinate. We might write a few lines, or we then put it to one side, or it drops down to the bottom of the calendar, and we can see the days ticking away towards that moment when we know we need to speak and we still haven't done it. And it can all feel quite anxiety provoking, because we know it's just effortful and it takes time and energy, and we don't really want that in our lives. We've got enough other things to be going on with. And as I said before, when we start at the beginning and we move through a process of writing, often we generate more ideas, and we suddenly realize, oh, we've got this wonderful case study we could include, or that beautiful example that we could use. And oh, by the way, and this thing as well. And suddenly, as I said, we've got this beast, this huge thing that has extrapolated out because of all the things that you know and all the things you want to communicate to people. And it becomes very long-winded. Now, when it becomes long-winded, we tend to lose the point. We tend to lose the main message. And so it can be a bit confusing for our audience to listen to. Now, the other thing that I often hear people talk about is that they just get stuck in the weeds. Okay, so they are asked to talk about a certain topic. And I was working with a lady who was a speaker at the UN. And she was asked to talk on a particular subject. It was slightly outside of her area of zone of genius, if you like, still within her expertise, but slightly outside of her zone of genius. So she did what all good speakers do. She went away and did a bunch of research. So she spent a lot of time looking at things, researching, reading papers, and generating huge amounts of information. And she came to deliver her speech, which was a good speech. But unfortunately, it went over time. So she was only a third of the way through her speech, and she got a 5-minute warning from the organizers, and then a 2-minute warning, then a 1-minute warning, and then she got the little timeout sign. And in the end, she was so into her speech, she didn't notice any of this. In the end, one of the organizers had to stand up and actually physically interrupt her and end the speech there and then, which she found mortifying because she had a lot more to say, but also she felt bad that she'd overrun for everybody else. So it's really easy to get stuck in the details and the weeds of things because we want to show our expertise. We want to show people what we know and how much we understand about a subject and the complexity and the nuances of it. So super easy to get stuck in the weeds when we know we've got a speech to present. Now, once we've done all this writing, once we've done all the research, the editing can feel really, really time consuming. And also we tend to edit as we go along. So we'll write a little bit and then we edit. We write a little bit and then we edit. And then we go back and we read. The next time we sit down with a speech, we read back what we've written, we start editing that bit again. So we're polishing and refining the first third or the first 2/3 of our speech. And we never really feel like it's a process that gets finished. We never get to the end until we're really forced to because time is against us. And then we have to create this ending in a bit of a rush. So sometimes we can end up feeling like the first third or 2/3 are, the first third is wonderfully polished. The second third is okay. The third bit is like, oh, it's a little bit clunky. It's not really saying what I needed to say. I don't feel like I've made a very strong call to action. So it can feel like the ending is not as impactful as the beginning. Now, the other thing, the alternate route to all of this is that we just pretend that it's not there. We can bury our heads in the sand. We can procrastinate and think, yep, I'll do that tomorrow. I'll definitely make some time tomorrow to start. And then suddenly it's Friday and then Monday, and the time starts to tick away, and suddenly we have to produce a lot in a very short amount of time. So we have the stress that builds up and carries on through all of that putting it off and procrastinating. And then we have a huge amount of stress when we have a short time frame and have to produce a lot of information in a very short space of time. So all in all, writing to speak or writing at all to produce a speech can feel really overwhelming. It can feel like it's incredibly effortful. It can feel like it's such a pain to get these brilliant ideas onto the paper. And it's so easy to fall out of love with our ideas in the process of doing it, and fall out of the love of speaking and communicating with other human beings, because it all starts to feel like a huge effort. And it doesn't really need to be like that. So let's go back to that wonderful client who had the breakthrough. She was a person who would sit down and write a speech from beginning to end. She would do huge amounts of research. She's a detail person. So she would dive in and she would do research for days and for weeks. And she'd end up with mounds of papers highlighted with quotes here and there, absolutely masses and masses of information. And she would never feel like the speech ever really got finished. And then she would deliver a speech and she would come away and we would talk about it and she'd be like, it was meh, it was okay. I feel like I missed the mark. So she'd always come away feeling a little bit frustrated with herself, that she didn't feel like she'd done enough of a good job to really deliver that message in a good way. So over the last couple of months, we've been working on different strategies to really help her get over this writing from the beginning process. So here's some of the things that we have looked at and we have really tried to make work for her. And amazingly, we've had this incredible breakthrough. So let's go back to this idea of speaking to writing. So we don't want to write. Writing is what we do when we want somebody to read something. We need to go back to the concept that we are speaking to human beings. So one of the best ways that you can start to get your ideas down is to speak them. I know that sounds crazy, but actually speak them. Now, this is where AI comes into its own. So there are a couple of different apps that you can use where you can just speak your ideas. So Otter AI is one of the ones that I use. I also use Google Keep on my phone. So whenever I'm out and about, whenever I'm doing anything and I have an idea, oh, that would be a great thing to talk about. Or I love the way I could say this. I simply record it. And both those apps transcribe for me. So I have a voice recording of everything that I've said, and I have an app and I have the transcription as well. So the first thing I'd say is start speaking your thoughts, not writing them down to start with, because remember, we're looking to find speech for the ear, not writing for the eye. It's very different. Now, sometimes we might need to do both because you might have an AV presentation, but I would always say speak for the ear first and then support it with the eyes. So your AV is not the presentation. Your AV is simply an aid to support the things that you're saying. So always speak for the ear first and then support with the eye afterwards. And one of the important things that I suggest and encourage my clients to do is move when they're speaking. So take your favorite walk, go for a walk, step outside, take your phone, have a little think about the kinds of things you want to be talking about as you begin your walk. And when you're really moving, when you're walking with purpose and your mind has freed up a little bit, that's when you hit record and just start talking. Now, some of the things you're going to say may not necessarily be useful or relevant, but that's fine. It's good information and maybe you can use it elsewhere. But just start talking, because you will say things as you're talking that you wouldn't say if you were writing it down. So move and speak. It's really helpful to kind of get ideas flowing and to move from one idea to the next idea. It's really helpful. Now, the second thing that's really, really important to do is don't do any research before you do this thing. So many clients come to me going, oh, I'm not really an expert in this area. I really don't know very much about such and such and such. And I'm talking to experts here. I'm talking to very senior people. And I would generally argue with them that that is not true. So when you're starting to create your ideas and curate them onto your app, into your dictation, start with what you know. Speak about what you already know. Because if you start looking at other things, you start researching into things, you'll be taken off into rabbit holes that you don't need to be in. So talk about what you know, get what you know down on paper, first of all. And then, and only then, if you think, actually, I need some support around this idea, I need some data that's going to help me prove this point, or actually what we really could do with here is a case study. I'm going to go research which case studies we have that might support this idea. So speak first and then research to support your understanding. Now, I'm going to caveat here and say, if somebody has asked you to talk about something that's completely outside your wheelhouse, feel free to go and do some research first of all, but just read rather than making heaps of notes. Just read and kind of see, well, where is the intersection between what I already know and what I'm being asked to talk about? And where your topic and that topic intersects, that's going to be your zone of genius. So talk about what you know and then do a bit of research to support that intersection. So that's the only time where I'd say, okay, do some research first of all. But otherwise, if it's about what you do, if it's about your role, if it's about your zone of genius, your expertise, own your expertise, write everything that you know first of all, speak everything that you know first of all, and then go and do the research to support it. Now, the next thing is about burying the lead. So essentially, what is your message? So every time you speak, every time you're creating rapport with other people, there'll be a reason that you're doing that. There'll be a reason for you talking. What is the one thing that you really, really want them to understand? What is the overall message that you're trying to deliver? And it's really tempting to build up to that message. It's really tempting to take your time and suddenly reveal this thing at the end. Unfortunately, the reality is that most people switch off at about 10 minutes in. So if you haven't spoken about your main message by 10 minutes in, it's going to get missed by at least some chunk of your audience. So don't bury the lead. So when you're speaking your thoughts, keep in mind the one message that you want everybody to really, really understand. And as you're speaking, you can kind of cross-reference and go, okay, is that relevant to what I want to get across? Is that really going to help this message land? Does it support all the ideas that I am talking about? And if it does, absolutely keep it. If it doesn't, then it's great information, but probably shouldn't be in this speech. So really think about the message and make sure that everything you're talking about is relating to the message. Now, the next thing is something that lots and lots of clients find a challenge. What do you know versus what do your audience need to know? Because if we go back to this idea of you being an expert, and you are an expert, even if you don't feel like you are, going back to this idea of being that expert, you know a lot. If I sat you down in a room with somebody else in your field who was on a peer level, you probably could talk for hours, possibly even days, about your areas of expertise. That is a huge amount of information. Your audience doesn't need to know everything that you know. So whilst you're checking in with, does this fit my message? Also check in with, does the audience really need to know this? Is it going to help them do their job more efficiently? Is it going to help them do their tasks more effectively? Is it going to help my clients understand something more effectively? If it is, brilliant. If it isn't, then it probably doesn't need to be there. It's just you giving your audience all of your expertise. And sometimes they just don't need all of it. And then finally, I'm going to bring up this idea of sonic landscape, which sounds really fancy, doesn't it? But it's just about the sounds of language. So as human beings, we enjoy the sounds that language makes. So as you're speaking out loud, one of the things that happens is that we use things kind of like alliteration. So where all the sounds at the beginning of certain words are the same. We might use a really lovely idea of antithesis, where you've got this thing over here versus that thing over there. We might use metaphor. So as we're talking, we might say, well, it's a little bit like, driving your car down your career superhighway. There's lots of things that we will say when we're speaking that we would never think of writing. So as you're speaking into your phone, as you're recording into Otter AI or whatever app you end up using, really think about, what does the language sound like? How can I make this sound juicier? to my client? How can I really entice their ear to keep listening as you're talking? And when you're speaking, you will do that far more naturally than you would do if you're writing. So we've talked a lot today about how to write to speak, or really how to speak to speak. So communication is an absolute key. If you're in a leadership position, how you communicate, how you express yourself is absolutely vital to creating rapport with your teams, with strategic partners, up and down the chain of command. And really, it's about how you communicate your ideas. The ideas themselves, I'm sure, are brilliant, because like I said, I've known so many clients with so many brilliant ideas. I know that they are out there. But it's really about how you communicate that to the people that you're talking to. And unfortunately, a brilliant idea badly delivered becomes conflated and the whole thing becomes a bad idea, which is, we don't want that for you. And it doesn't need to be like that. Adaptive skills, so those ones where we human beings can show empathy and we can inspire people to do amazing things. Those are the things that are going to future-proof your career. And being able to communicate through speaking, through delivering incredible, impactful, powerful speeches is one of those ways. After all, we are humans and we're talking to human beings. So we really want to be speaking for people's ears and then their eyes, if we're using AV to support. But essentially, it's about speaking to the ear. And results are driven by impact. And the impact you make is going to be driven by the quality of your communication, your spoken communication. Try not to bury that lead. So your speech will have a message. It's really important that you deliver that message by making sure that it's reiterated throughout the speech and it comes early on in the speech. And don't be tempted to hide behind your AV. So let's just recap on the 5 things that you can do to help you speak a brilliant speech. So speak to write. Use AI to help you record, dictate how you want to communicate your ideas to other people. Own your expertise. So start by talking about all the things that you already know on this topic and then worry about editing later. You know a lot more than you think you do. And if you want to go and do some research later to support your ideas, feel free, but don't start with the research. Don't bury that lead. So make sure your message is at the top of the piece of information, not buried later on, because people stop listening. Make sure you're checking in between what you know and what they really need to know all the way through your editing process. And as you're speaking, really indulge yourself in the sonic landscape. Make your speech sound beautiful. The more pleasing it is to the ear, the easier it will be for your audience to remember. I hope that's been useful for you. Speaking a speech is such an important part of today's leadership. I really want you to be able to do that with such ease, with no procrastination, saving heaps of time, and really make that human connection. If you found it useful today, please subscribe below. It would be lovely to see you on a regular basis. And if you'd like to, please feel free to book a communication strategy call where we can talk specifically about your needs as a communicator. Take care, and we'll speak very soon. Bye now.